For welcoming me to your meeting. This isn't my usual occupation. I would rather be standing in an operating theatre than standing here, actually. But thank you anyway, and your interest in the work that I've been doing over the last 12 years in Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. That one is it, Patrick? In April this year, I was honoured with receiving a Paul Harris Fellowship, and when that happened, Lionel Nuns, the president at the time of the Wellington North Rotary Club, made that little statement that you see there. As soon as I saw it, I realised, actually, that's what I believe. I sort of knew, but hadn't put it into words. That is what I believe, and I think that's what took me on a rather unexpected journey. It started in August 2002 when paediatric surgeon Brendan Bokert and I first stepped onto Timorese soil and into Timorese sunshine. We were going as part of the Australian and New Zealand response to the upheaval that had been happening there, and I at least thought that this was going to be a once-er, but in fact it was the beginning of the most amazing journey. The Royal Australasian College of Surgeons had been contracted by AusAid to provide tertiary services in Timor, and we were the New Zealand arm of that, and our job was to provide otherwise unavailable surgery for children. You may not be like me. When I was first invited to go, I actually didn't know where Timor was, and I had to have a bit of a hunt on the map. And you can see East Timor is the little brown bit at the side there. The white bit is still part of Indonesia, which is here. Timor Sea here with the big deposits of oil, as you know, in the middle, the boundary of which is being changed by Australia and Jakarta every now and again. All sorts of consequences. Apart from its history of occupation, which you'd be aware of, a lot of us only knew of Timor as the place where hippies went in the 60s and 70s. People of my age might remember that. And they went to Bacau, which is just on the eastern tip there. And I went there last year with a colleague, and it's still idyllic, and it would still be a lovely place to live, and I can see why the hippies went there. It also happens to be the place where William Bligh washed up after he'd been at sea for 47 days after the mutiny. So he thought he'd arrived in heaven, of course. So this was the beginning of the journey. This is Mr. Bokert, the paediatric surgeon, trying to decide what to take on the aeroplane with him. It was a 12-seater plane, and there were 10 army personnel plus us. So this is Darwin Airport. So we took everything we needed with us, because in Timor there was nothing. Nothing. These boxes were donated and purchased, some by Mr. Bokert himself. We took all our surgical instruments, theatre linen, gifts, toys, painkillers, antibiotics, medications, IV fluids, theatre scrubs, nutritional supplementation, everything that we might need, we took in our boxes. And to just look for a wee minute at why there was such absolute resource paucity, we'll have a wee look at the history of the place. In 1260, a Chinese traveller first noticed and mentioned the sandalwood forests. I don't know if you remember. My first perfume was sandalwood. I think I was about 12. And this is where it largely came from. In the 16th century, Dutch and Portuguese people divided the country. And you can, oh, wrong thing. You can see the division there into east and west, and they occupied it for 400 years. Missionaries arrived soon after them and built schools. But then the more recent history is there for you to read. and some of which I think you'll be already aware. So we were 3 months after the Declaration of Independence, so it was a newly independent country, and because the Indonesian occupiers had been very oppressive, the country was left with no experience, no expertise, no skill, and as they were leaving, they ravaged the country, they tore up everything, they tore up all the phones, all the electrical grid was destroyed, forestation was burned. I think the only things they didn't burn were the hospital, it wasn't really affected. I think the Parliament building, I think, was left untouched, and the Bishop's house. Apart from that, it was all gone. And I've got a little note here, and I can't remember it exactly now, but President Janana Guzmão, the first president of the Republic, was in New Zealand a few years ago, and I don't know if you remember, but the reporter was interviewing him and was trying to get him to talk about rage or anger or something like that, and he had nothing to say except it's history, it's behind us, and he felt no need for an apology. And that's actually quite symbolic of the Timorese people. They held no grudge at all. They smile all the time, and they just make the best of what they have, and they don't seem to hold any grudges against anybody. So off we went, and over the last decade I've had 4 main projects, I guess, and the first one was this paediatric surgery, and that was our goal. When a surgical team was about to arrive in Timor, the information was given out over the various pulpits in the villages, because it's a largely Catholic country, and they're quite devotional, and that's how they got the message of imminent surgical opportunity. The children would then go and see, or the families would go and see their village elders, and the elders would arrange transport for them to the hospital. We would hold a clinic on the first day of our visit, and it would just be like a room 3 times this size, I guess, full of people who just came as early as they could, many of them walking for several days to get there, and they would just sit and wait until it was their turn. And if you think of us, when we have an appointment, you know, if we're late, we get a bit anxious, and, you know, get a bit testy. And they have children, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 children, and they're all there, and grandma's there, and they've got food in their pockets, and they just wait. So we very quickly learnt that our biggest allies were the local people, and local collaboration became very important, and it was the way we engaged best with the families. And we proceeded, using local people as much as we could. As I said, when we arrived, the city was still burning. There were very few houses not affected. I don't know that I saw any, actually, as we drove in from the airport and through the city. This was the hospital at that time. It was completely controlled by armed personnel, which was actually quite nice. It made you feel quite safe. The little tents, little tents here, were all over the hospital. They're UN tents, of course, and the hospital was completely covered by those, as was any park or any playground or beachfront or any spare space was completely covered with UN tents, and that's where families were living. One of the benefits of having the military in the hospital was that it became a safe place for children to play, and that was the first thing that I noticed, that they played around the hospital grounds. And the second thing I noticed was that sharps, if you know what a sharp is, it's something you use for an injection, a needle, or a scalpel blade, sharp things like that, which are deadly, were being tipped outside the wards into the ground, and that's where the children were playing. That became my first alert. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And that's typical of a tent that held a whole family. And that one is actually on just outside the operating theatre door, and that was the theatre manager and his family. And they lived there for months, too afraid to go back to their own home, or they didn't have one to go back to. This little family. I met them quite early, 3 generations of women there. And I think this is when I turned my attention to women and children rather more directly, because I think they're often the direct recipients of conflict. They suffer perhaps more than anything, that the babies keep coming and children still need food and conflict is happening all around them. You might be able to notice that the older woman has got red staining on her mouth. One of the anaesthetists told me that betel nuts are an almost perfect pain relief. They relieve pain of every sort, and they don't affect your cognitive ability. It's perfect almost, except that you get permanent red staining on your mouth and your teeth. But when you know what they've been through, you can understand most of older women have that red staining. And just to show you so you don't get too sad, this arrived in my mailbox about 3 days ago, and that's the hospital now. So the decade has made a difference. It's actually quite beautiful, I think. And grass is growing and rubbish is cleared every day. They're just getting a rubbish system underway. So we walked into that sort of situation. We had nowhere to sleep. We had to sleep in a bed in the hospital ward, which was a bit tricky, under mosquito nets. The team leader of the college, who was the resident surgeon there, was newly married, and he was there with his wife, who was also a doctor, but she was there just as his wife. And so she kind of took it upon herself to look after us, and the first thing she did was made us Marmite sandwiches. She heard that's what New Zealanders have. And she bought me a bottle of Sprite, and I remember the Sprite and the Marmite sandwiches. It was truly wonderful when you've got nothing else going for you. That was good. So this is Team New Zealand at work. We got straight to it. I think on day 2 we started operating, and Mr. Bokert, as you can see there on your left, worked from 7 till 7 usually, and I supported him absolutely, but even I got to the stage where I thought, hasn't he done enough today? But no, one more, he'll do one more. And he just worked and worked and worked until we got through as many children as we could. And because we were there to provide surgery, but also to build capacity, we kept in mind that we needed to be passing knowledge and skills to other people while we were working. So we started quite quickly to train the one and only female nurse in theatre, my dear friend Albertina. And that's her there. I talked to her straight away because the male nurses in theatre tended to sit outside smoking in the morning until the first case of the day started. But Albertina, who mother of 8, was inside cleaning, preparing the theatres and getting everything ready. Yeah, quite. So got me going a little bit. So I sort of took her a few gifts and sent a bit of food home, and she became quite trusting of us. So she used to come into our theatre and stand and watch. The next thing she would be scrubbing beside me, and then on this day she scrubbed on her own. You can see I'm standing there with my arms folded, nothing to do, and she took the whole case. And Mr. Bokert was completely confident with her, and she went on to become one of our biggest allies. The second kind of project that I did in Timor was specialty practice education. We'd only just come home from that trip with the PEDS team, and we had a phone call. I had a phone call from the hospital in Delhi saying that they wanted to help the nurses in theatre in the same way as we'd helped Albertina. So I was contracted at that point to provide some specialty practice education, and I want to show you these people because they all matter. This is Duarte, the only Muslim, as far as I know, that was in theatre. And it was interesting, he wasn't treated differently, but I felt he was excluded a little. And I've met him since. He didn't stay in theatre, he's gone to an administrative job, and I've met him, and he doesn't look very happy, and so that was kind of sad. I might have been wrong, he might have been included, but I felt he was excluded a little bit, and that was a bit upsetting. This is Anna. Anna was married to an Indonesian, and that happened sometimes. And so once independence came, it became a bit of a problem. So she had to move to Akusi, which is a little enclave in the western part of Timor, the Indonesian part, for her own and her children and her husband's safety. But they weren't safe. Her husband was killed on his way home from work one night. He was bludgeoned to death with rocks for being Indonesian, I suppose. I'm not sure. So she felt she had to do something to ensure her children's education, and she came and left her children with neighbours and came on a boat to Dili. And she was constantly laughing, and you can see there she's got a bit of a smile on her face, but she was pranking the whole time, always pranking, pulling out chairs on people and acting the goat, as my kids say. And one day Otavia, my trusty interpreter, my friend, said to her, "Anna, you're always making jokes, why can't you be serious?" And Anna said, "If I didn't make jokes, someone would see what's really in my heart." Whereupon, I burst into tears and told them to all go home for the day. This person here, a lovely man, applied for the course, said he was a nurse, and we were going through all the sessions, and on Fridays I used to try and do something a little lighter, and we went and looked at the pharmacy. And while we were there, he started chatting to one of the men that pushes a trolley around the hospital delivering the pharmacy goods. And I said to him, "Oh, Victor, you know him?" He said, "Yes, I used to do that." So he wasn't a nurse. He was a pusher of a cart. But of course there's no records. The nursing school had been burned, everything had been burned. But the person that helped me through these kinds of situations was my interpreter. And she said to me, "Mrs. Lynn, he survived because he told lies. We survived because we've kept our heads down and told lies, and that's how we survive." And she told me that he has 2 families to support, his own and his brother's. And she said, "There's got to be a way around this." So, a very young girl, she was at university at the time, gave me some very wise advice, and we found a way around it. He completed the course, and we found him a position that was a compromise so that he could at least continue to earn money. Interpreters became the most valuable people in our team all the way through. And that's her there. Whoops. As you can see, in that classroom scene, she's taken a different role. She's not standing on my shoulder interpreting like she had been. She's now moving towards the class, and she's keeping an eye on them. She alerted me one day to the fact that one of the students was holding his book upside down. I hadn't realised he couldn't read. This is Jacinto there. That's Otavia, who we've just been talking about. And that's the new quality manager, a brand new idea for them. And this is at the end of the program, and Jacinto is receiving his folder. He's now the theatre nurse manager, which is kind of nice because you think, where sometimes people just disappear after you've put in quite a lot of work. But he really has risen up through the ranks and is doing a very good job at the moment. After that job, I was contacted by USAID. Because they had contracted an outfit called the National Cooperative Business Association of Washington, and they were implementing a program of health delivery amongst the coffee cooperative. Coffee, of course, is the main crop in Timor, and it's beautiful coffee because it's almost entirely grown in the hills, so it's Arabica. And they don't blend it. You know how here we blend it with the Robusta? They don't blend, so it's pure. If you get any, you can get it at Lafare. If you get any pure Arabica Timorese coffee, it's something else. So this group of businessmen set up this organisation where they brought all the coffee plantation people together and formed a cooperative to ensure that they, in fact, received the money back from the sale of coffee. They helped to market it worldwide. But then they formed a health division, and that's when they asked me to help them. They built a clinic in every, or within walking distance of every plantation. Healthcare was free for anyone that worked on the plantation. And at first, I liked the notion of this work, but I was a wee bit unsure. USA, not sure what I think about that. and I was completely wrong not to have any worries. We went around every clinic in the country. I had to do an audit of their practice, and they brought that audit on themselves. They wanted to ensure they were doing everything to standard. All the recommendations I made were acknowledged and accepted and acted on, and even after I came home I received notification when another recommendation had been implemented. And I emailed last week to Marcy. I'll just move on one. That's Marcy. That's now. Back then, when I did this project, she was just a young mother with 3 little children, or 2, and she had been living under a bridge in Timor in the days of the burning of the city, and she told me that on the 26th of September, I think it was, when the Anzac forces arrived, her husband, who had stayed in the city, because he had sent her up the hills for safety, and she had a walkie-talkie, and he called her and he said, "Marcy, you can come home, the New Zealanders have arrived." And it was quite a moment, and she took me up and showed me this bridge where she lived, I think for 2 days or something like that. Is it getting a bit time, Lee? Okay. So this is from their brochure. They've branched out now to primary healthcare, men's health, community programs. Wonderful to see that it's no longer just a struggling organisation, but they really are putting a lot of work into health. I'll skip a bit. And this is the last one. And this is the project that I did with, well, I'm still doing, with the Wellington North Rotary Club. You can see there. I had a phone call in July 2010 from a person I used to know in Kandala, who asked me if I'd like to write a submission for a proposal for healthcare in Timor, which we did. And it was to support safe surgery, and we wanted to do that by improving the sterility procedures within theatre and the cleaning procedures. And that was our aims. Consistent surgical sterility, because at the time it was pretty iffy. And the cleaning wasn't happening, nobody was cleaning except for Albertina. So that was our aim. We procured a global grant to fund it, and it was the first time I'd had proper money to spend on the work that I was doing. That was amazing. And those were our goals. So we've implemented, Goal 1 we implemented as phase 1 of the project. And Goal 2, we went back and implemented that as phase 2. Operational management we're still looking at. In phase 1, we put in this wonderful ISO-compliant shelving system for sterile supplies. Up until then, they've been sitting on the floor in boxes, falling over, dust, mice, all sorts of things. And this is movable stuff. It's like you would have here in Bowen Hospital. Same. That's the theatre manager there, looking pretty pleased. We ran a sterilising technology seminar, and that's some of the pupils. I think we had 20 people each day for 5 days. We printed competency workbooks, had them printed here, translated into Teton, their language, and we showed the senior nurses how to assess the competency of the other staff. And that's what they're doing there. He is now the nurse educator, and he's checking on him. That's the infection control nurse, and that's the competency book that we're just working through there. And that's the shelving with the linen and the supplies on, and if you'd seen it before, you'd know how amazing that was. And that's just a reminder. Those ambulances were donated with the best intentions in the world, but not followed through. There was no local collaboration, there was no translation, for instance, of the operating manual. Nobody made sure there was petrol available. Nobody made sure there was someone employed to drive it. So they rusted away. And I keep that one in my forefront all the time. It's a reminder that you cannot do it just by giving some money, you've got to follow it all through. And those are some of my favourite things in Timor. The sunsets are to die for. The food is fabulous. There are no pesticides or insecticides in Timor. The food is beautiful. The children. And that there is our surgeon going for a swim.